to the world. We have today Pierre Roman with us. Pierre, if you could please join us. Pierre is a senior cloud operations advocate at Microsoft. He engages with the operations and infrastructure communities on behalf of Microsoft. He's part of a team that drives growth and adoptions of the Azure platform by providing upskilling guidance and bringing community feedback to the product groups. With over 25 years of experience in the industry, he brings a well-rounded view of all facets of the infrastructure and operations lifecycle. His skills enable him to relate to his audience and cultivate relationships at all levels, from the nuts and bolts guy and gal to senior management levels. Pierre, it's an honor to have you with us. We very much look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you for having me. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right. So today I want to talk about Azure governance and management. And first of all, for those of you who have looked at the agenda and think to yourself, this guy looks nothing like the headshot that was on the agenda. This is my COVID haircut. That way I don't have to go to a barber and have to wear the hazmat suit just to get my haircut. So back to the back to the topic at hand. So in this session, we're going to build up a little bit on what Dominic said in the last session in terms of rethinking cloud governance. You can reach me on Twitter's at Wired Canuck is probably the easiest way for you to get in touch with me. And when we say running with scissors, Azure governance and management is something that in a lot of cases is almost an afterthought. And let me show you a little bit, or tell you a little bit about why I think that is. So when we're looking at, when we're talking to customers, and I've traveled the world and talked to many customers, big and small, and there's always things like, oh, we're a small company, so proper governance doesn't apply to us. Well, we'll talk about why this is completely wrong. I'm getting questions, not questions, but comments that it's, oh, we're just doing this little project in the cloud because our IT folks don't have time to get involved. So we're just going to throw up in the cloud for the duration of the campaign. And then when we're done, we're going to take it off. And so we don't really need to build this big governance around it. It's just going to be a one-time shot, or we're doing it little projects one at a time. Again, this is not the way you want to think about this. We're new to the cloud, so we're letting our development team figure it out. This is very dangerous for many, many reasons, most of which is because you don't have control over which resources are being deployed. It's very easy for maybe somebody in your development team to say, hey, let me spin up a 5-node Kubernetes cluster. Spin it up, deploy a few workloads on it, and then either forget to turn it off or to remove it when they're done their testing, and then you're incurring cost. And the last one is, oh, this is just a prototype. We're trying this out. We'll think about proper governance when we are closer to production. Again, this is just a very short or very small sample of some of the comments or statements that actual customers have given me over the years, well, since cloud has started. So we have to start looking at this much differently because all of these comments are completely wrong. So when we're looking at governance, or when we're looking at life cycle of any application or any workloads in cloud, and of course, I work for Microsoft, so I'm going to be talking about Azure here, but this applies to pretty much all cloud deployment. So first, you deploy or you migrate your workload to the cloud. Second, you should be securing, so making sure your security management, your threat protection, because cloud is an extension of your own data center. You're really looking at running your workload on somebody else's hardware. Then you have to protect your workload. So how do you back up the information? How do you back up the configuration? Do you do restores? What is your disaster recovery posture? Are you able to fail over quickly, Are you building a highly available multi-region system that will be able to self-heal? Are you actually monitoring the application, the infrastructure, the like all of the pieces that's make up your situation and your environment? Then how do you have continuous configuration? So configuration updates, management, your automation, your scripting, this all has to be identified and configured. And also you have to set up your governance. Typically in cloud native or small company, and I've worked with a lot of startups, when they look at this life cycle, one of the things that happens is the security kind of is the last thing they look at. So they just migrate and then they start working. They protect, if they don't have a strong IT background, sometimes the backup or the disaster recovery kind of gets left behind, and the governance, because governance is a business decision, not technical decision. So it's a way to technically enforce business decision across your environment, which is either on-prem or in cloud or in both or in a hybrid environment. So today we're really going to look about governing. When you're looking at governing your environment, the typical enterprise is kind of walking a tightrope, because if you don't have any governance, you may end up with unexpected billing. So VM size, it's very easy for a developer, and as Dominic mentioned in his session, you can spin up a new server in like 30 seconds to a minute. But because it's not on your own hardware, you get to pick, do I want a A1 machine or a G5 machine? The difference is, let's say for sake of arguments, I don't have the cost memorized top of my head, but the difference between $70 a month for an A1 and $8,000 a month for a G5. If you don't have any governance, or if you don't have any restrictions or automation to prevent your IT and developers from spinning services or VMs in your environment, and they spin a G5 machine, well, you may end up with unexpected billing. You may not have budgeted for it. And I'll tell you a real story that happened to me. I was doing a presentation at a conference, much like this one, live in this case. And on stage, I showed a script on how we can easily deploy a 10-node cluster using G2 machines. So G2 machines are about $6,000 a month. The point was I was able to deploy everything and then resize it and then resize it back to G2 to show growth and to show scale and to show all kinds of things. At the end of the presentation, I said, well, thank you very much. Have a good day. Closed my laptop and walked away. Forgot to turn them off. At the end of the month, I got my bill. It was very unexpected. And then I realized what I had done. But there was no automation, and there was no policies in place to keep me from doing that. Number two is there's no way to associate cost with profit and loss centers. So if you're looking at your environment and you have a marketing environment and you have a sales group and you have your core product group, and each of them have campaigns and workloads that are running in the cloud, if you don't have proper tagging, if you don't have proper policies, if you don't have proper governance, there's no way for you to charge back to these individuals' departments. That way, when your bill comes in at the end of the month, all you end up with is a very large dump, and then you have to manually figure out, okay, which server does that belong to, which database does the marketing own, and so on. Also, in Europe and in with GDPR, and in the Americas with the Patriot Act, a lot of companies have compliance regulations and says that where their data has to live. If you're in healthcare in Canada, for example, your data must reside within Canada. So we're looking at data sovereignty and data residency, which are two different things. Data sovereignty is which laws does that which laws apply to that data, and data residency is where does that data actually sit. Is it in Canada? So for example, if I'm a Canadian company, but I have a branch office in the US, whether or not my data is in Canada or the US, because I have a corporate foothold in the US, the US laws or the Patriot Act then applies to my data. So for that, you absolutely have to talk to your legal department and figure out where your legal and compliance standpoint sits. But if you don't have any policies or governance, you are at risk on that end. The other one is to resource without mandated security controls. You can very easily in any cloud deploy a virtual network, put a lot of workloads on them, open it up so that you can manage it remotely, and then leave open potential management ports, so RDP, SSH, all these ports open to the internet. So how do you ensure that these ports are either turned off by default, that you've enabled some security controls such as JIT, or just-in-time administration, or bastion servers or jump boxes within your network? So these are all kind of network security groups that may be added to your environment, but if you don't have a way to enforce that, then you're potentially leaving yourself open for some security issues. So, and that's why we say that using the cloud is like running with scissors. Businesses need to be agile. How can you be first to market? How can you grab that advantage or capitalize on new business trend? What do? You run. You work fast. Like, you want to be first out there. You want to be first deployed to gain that first to market advantage. However, when you run without any kinds of safeguards around you, you can very easily hurt yourself. That's why the analogy of running with scissors. You can make it to your end goal running with scissors, but if you trip anywhere along the way, you can stab yourself. So when we're looking at governance, we're really looking at technical governance, controlling accesses to resources, applying specific standard configuration that you have decided and you have identified as a business. It's not a technology issue, it's a business issue. So you have to think about it that way. How do you deny the creation of non-conformant resources? For example, if you're in the UK and you have a requirement to keep all of your data and services within the UK, what happens if a specific cloud service is not yet available in the UK region? So you're thinking, I'm just going to put it in West Europe or in Ireland or in the US or anywhere else in the world. We have any of the 60-some other regions that we have in the world. Well, if you do that, your system will work and it'll function well, but that resource is now not conforming to your compliance regulations. And the last thing is, how do you control and manage your cost? Is really any system that is not cost efficient will fail. And when we're looking at migrating, and Dominic talked a little bit about that, migrating from on-prem to the cloud, you really have to look at the workloads that you're moving, that you're lifting and shifting. Lift and shift, by the way, is the first step, because when you're lifting and shifting, you're going from VMs on-prem to VMs in the cloud. You're really not using any of the cloud native services that may bring a lot more cost efficiencies and also a lot more flexibility and scale to your organization. So lifting and shifting is step one, then re-architecting or re-platforming is the next step. But if you're looking at a machine on-prem that has, just off the top of my head, 32 cores and a terabyte of RAM and 20 terabytes of disk space, and you take those specs and you put them into the cloud, that machine may be a lot more expensive than you anticipated. You really have to look at what your performance needs to meet in terms of if you have 32 cores, but they're running at 5% on average, then maybe you can afford in the cloud to be a little lower. And we'll get you in a little later in this presentation on how we have tools that can help you with that. So why should you care about governance? Because without those safeguards, you can very easily end up in a ditch or hurting yourself and your business. So those safeguards are really guardrails to keep you in the road. Of course, you may bang yourself a little bit if you're not completely covered and if you've not completely thought through all of your governance issues or areas such as security, access control, cost management, policies, compliance, all of that. But at least you're still within the road and you're not completely a write-off. So when we're looking about cloud native governance, it's really a way to remove the barriers to compliance. So they enable you to run fast without the fear that doing something really quickly will end up hurting yourself or costing you more than you expected. So for the developers, the operators, and management, they get together and they build policies and they build restrictions and apply controls to this environment so that your development team, IT team, or business unit can go forward with their project without having the fear to do something that may end up getting you in court or fined if it's out of compliance, or even cost you a lot more than expected at the beginning of your project. So for governance in the cloud for Azure specifically, we have multiple of tools that are built in. So you don't have to pay extra for any of those. These are built into your subscriptions. Number one is role-based access control. I used to say that, or I've had a customer to which I said after a review that all of their directors and VPs had full rights to change any resources in their environment. And some of those people were not technical. They were great business people, but they're not technical people. So because they needed to view the information in terms of what the cost was going on, how effectively the resources were being used, they were given much more rights than they needed because it was easy. You can set up a role-based access control so an administrator can do this. A management and above can view all of the information but not affect any changes. Policies, so real-time enforcement of policies. So to say that in the production environment, you cannot have a VM size that is outside of these families and outside of these particular sizes. And of course, you can have multiple policies that apply to multiple environments. So your prod and dev and testing environment may have several different policies because you may not want to apply in your dev and test the same horsepower that you would give to your production environment, because of course your dev and your production and your dev and your testing environment don't have all of the load that all your customers and the regular business would apply to those services. So you can have real-time enforcement, you can have compliance assessment to say through your policy, does that apply to CPI compliance or anything? And you can even have them do remediation where when something is deployed and it's out of policy, it will actually either roll it back or affect some change to bring it back within policy. So you have access control and you have control over resources. You can also set up, walk too fast. You can also set up blueprints. And when we talk about blueprints, we're talking about literally what a blueprint for a building is, where you have a document or a configuration for your environment. So if you want to deploy a new environment for testing or for a new campaign, then the role-based access control and the policies are already in it. They could have ARM templates to automatically deploy a compliant network with proper security compliance controls already built in, so you can basically stamp that blueprint on multiple different environments. The resource graph within the Azure portal allows you to view a kind of like a top down of all of the resources that you have. You can export that to Power BI or spreadsheets in order for you to review. Our management group, because your systems or your subscriptions doesn't have to be a single subscription. So you have an account, which is the company, basically who pays the bill. And under you could have multiple subscriptions for multiple departments. And those subscriptions may have different resource groups that will hold a specific application and all of the dependencies for that application that share the same life cycle for that workload. And that hierarchy can be defined so that the resources on a specific resource group report up to a specific subscription. And then you can break down all of the costs in your environment to basically define it to your organizational hierarchy. And of course, all of these contribute to cost, but you can also, through the Azure portal, very easily monitor your cost, your spent, and optimize the resources through some tools that I will show you in a little bit. So there's a lot of things there. And what I typically tell my customers is to start off small and then scale out. So start one piece at a time. For example, let's start with role-based access control. When you're looking at role-based access control, define specific roles, readers, so the people that need access to actually observe the environment, but not actually affect any changes. You can do this at the subscription or at the resource group level. You can have resource specific or custom roles in terms of your tech support may be able to restart a VM, but not be able to create new ones because they're support, they're not architects, and they're not the people that are building your workloads, they're the people that are supporting it. Of course, contributor roles and owners. The owners have all rights, and that's basically your break glass accounts that you would want to have. Nobody should be running with a owner account for their day-to-day work. There's too much in terms of risk to get anything done in there. And of course, all of that can be also added to automated process. Azure policy is a way to define in code what you're actually allowed to do. So for example, what you see there is a very minor policy that say that all of your resources have to be tagged and tagged with a cost center code. If the field doesn't exist when the resource is deployed, it will actually append one for you based on the tag that has been assigned to the resource group. So there's multiple ways of applying policies. You can apply a policy in a observing methodology where the policy will not change anything, but will report when things are out of policy. You can have a policy that will be applied and then block things that are, or block or remediate things that are outside of that policy. And of course, because of our GitHub action, you can use policy as code. So as you change your policies and check it into your code repo, that policy or that change will automatically be applied to all of the environments where it applies. So there's the automation. The blueprints is a way to allow engineers to define and orchestrate automatic rollout of those environments, including role-based access control and policies that we talked about. But also to lay down, as I mentioned, the fundamental infrastructure. So the network, the security group, who's got access, which IP address are going to be used, and so on. So you get all of that information. And the way it works is your cloud engineer, or with management, of course, you create the blueprint. You add the artifacts, so your Azure resources that are going to be used within that blueprint. Identify which ones can be spun up by default. It creates a blueprint that can now be applied to any other environment, such as management group or subscriptions, and so on. So now we've talked about role-based access control. We've talked about policy. We've talked about blueprint. The last one is controlling your spend with Azure and cost management. And if we look at the portal, and this is just a snapshot of my own portal for my own subscription, and I wanted to show you that in it, you actually do see very clearly a cost analysis. So what services are costing you on a monthly basis? Where are your spent actually being assigned to? Which resource groups are you spending your environment to? And if you look on the left side, you can set up cost alerts. So when your budget goes over a certain amount, to actually raise an alert. Maybe some things somewhere is not what you expected it to be, and that's fine. We're not talking here at this point of blocking it. We're talking about bringing it up to the surface. So giving you the environment, or giving you the visibility into it. You can see your invoice. You can actually see advisor recommendation, and those advisor recommendation will, let's say, look, for example, at your VMs. And if you have a VM that's sitting at 10% utilization month over month, the advisor recommendation will suggest a new family of VMs, or a new size for that VM, that will give you the same performance, but without the associated added cost. So this is all part of the portal, and it's completely free and ready for you to use immediately. So when we're looking at continuous cost management, what we're really looking at is gaining visibility into your environment in terms of cost analysis. Where am I spending my money? What am I spending my money on? And is it really what I expected? You can export that to a storage account, so you could do historical analysis of your cost growth over time. You can export it to a Power BI dashboard that you can customize, so that you can show your management or your upper management the state and the health of your environment in a easy to drill down dashboard that's easy to understand. Of course, we have accountability. So how do we make sure that we have budgets, that we set budgets, and that we're notified when those budgets go over? Set up alerts to the proper authorities and the proper people within your environment and your enterprise that something has gone wrong, something is above what we expected, and then we can have a discussion as to whether it's warranted. Was the budget set too low, or did the implementation overstep? Then you look at that. And manage group, in terms of all of these costs go to marketing, all of these costs go to sales, all of these costs go to product. And that way, you have a great understanding of where you're spending your money and whether or not the ROI is worth it. And last is recommendation. So the Azure Cost Advisor recommendation will look at all of that information and provide you with actionable feedback as to what your environment looks like and whether or not there are options for lowering your cost, but providing you with the same performance in the same environment. So to get more information after that, there's a very easy link here, aka.ms/Azure-governance. This is where you're going to get all of the information about policies, about role-based access control, about blueprints, all of our new information. You get all of the technical documentation, but also the overviews on how to set up proper governance in your environment. Governance is not a technical issue, as I mentioned earlier. It is a business decision meant to enforce business requirement and business limitation in terms of compliance to an environment that can very easily grow beyond what's expected or beyond what is required. So I highly recommend that you go and check that out, aka.ms/Azure Governance, and get informed as to what is possible for you to manage your environment so that you can quickly deploy to market without having some issues and getting out of off the road and off the superhighway. I'm showing my age here. So with that being said, thank you very much, and we'll be on for more Q&A. So my name is Pierre Roman, and you can reach me at @WiredCanuck on Twitter. Thank you.
Pierre, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm going to ask you to stop sharing the presentation now so that the audience can see us on the full screen. Perfect. So thank you so much for those insights. Again, for those in the audience, I have seen some of the questions that have come through here, and feel free to ask additional questions. I'll keep monitoring the Q&A box here for your questions. It's a similar kind of tone on some of the questions on our previous session, and curious to know your insight about this related to the impacts of the pandemic on what's happening with cloud migrations nowadays, Pierre. So what are you seeing across industries, across the different customers that you're working with? Is it a slowdown? It's an acceleration of those migrations? What does that look like these days?
We have seen about 3 years worth of digital transformation scrunched into 4 to 5 months. People have realized that their staff now needs to work from home. Therefore, they need to set up an environment where employees can connect. And that's just the internal facing applications. Then their staff can connect and manage and do their work. So a virtual desktop has been a great boom. The other things like Office 365 for collaboration and SharePoint Online and Teams. Teams has just skyrocketed in terms of allowing organization to meet just like they would if they were in the same office, but by doing it from anywhere in the world. So the work from home and the respecting quarantine without affecting productivity, this has been it's been huge, and it actually has been a bit of a challenge in terms of capacity for all of the cloud providers, where in some region we quickly ramped up to a capacity where the hardware, because we deploy new hardware and the data centers as fast as we can get hardware, but because of the pandemic, the parts and the material wasn't coming as fast because those manufacturers were also slowed down. So we weren't able to keep up with some of the growth because we were also affected by the pandemic, but we've actually resolved that now by issuing quotas on our own internal testing environment and so on to favor customers. So capacity is back where it should be. But yes, years worth of digital transformations crunched into a few months. So it's been actually quite exciting thing to see. And I think that the industries and the enterprises have now realized that there may have been a better way of doing things, and we didn't have to hold on to that on-prem footprint. That's like, I'm a server hugger. I like my blinky lights and the comfort of knowing that server number 3 is right there and it's running because I can see it. But the cloud does open so many possibilities in terms of efficiency, speed, and capabilities that now I think more than ever, enterprises are started to realize that.
And you touch on a point that is a question that several of the participants have brought up, or at least I'll paraphrase the theme, which is a lot of organizations have migrated to the cloud, and then there is much more than just a migration of storage to the cloud. There's processing on the cloud, there are applications in the cloud, and the cloud keeps getting more and more prevalent in the way that they work. For those organizations that have not taken advantage of those capabilities, what do you feel are the major hurdles that they have to overcome? Is it a lack of knowledge about capabilities? It's about fear of losing control? Is it about security? What do you see as the major impediment on those who have not yet taken advantage of these opportunities?
I'm gonna give you the consulting answer, which means it depends. But in a lot of cases, it's a combination of all of that. It's comfort with your on-prem. Change is hard. So when you're changing something that's been running for potentially decades in a very specific environment, and it's a well-oiled machine, to actually make a change is scary. Unknown, because you don't exactly know how your system is going to react when you move it. What else is going to break? Because in every environment you have, let's say, I'll take a database for example, and you have a database that supports a specific workload. But for a separate workload, they needed to do a lookup. So they made a connection to that database just to look up, let's say, a part number or a customer name or a customer ID. But this wasn't documented because, of course, a lot of these things happen because business need to work fast. So we need to get this going. Where can I get that information? Oh, if you connect to that database, it's got it. Okay, done. And then we move on. Then you move that database to the cloud, and now you've broken other workloads. So there's that fear that, okay, if I move this, what else am I going to break? There is in some organization where cost is like the margins are really, really tight, especially in this day and age. How do you spend the money to train your employees so that they would gain the knowledge that they need in order to not only move, but manage the environment into a cloud environment, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google, or others? There's a learning curve there. So depending on where you are in the learning curve, there's going to be a fear and a need for you to train your employees, or if you're an independent, how do you make the time to get that knowledge? And while you're doing that, you're not actually billing and you're not actually getting revenues. So those are all. Others are compliance. If you're in healthcare, if you're in government, if you're in security, the guns and badges portfolios in terms of like the national defense, policing, security, are they allowed to the cloud? Are they allowed to specific cloud? Are they allowed to different regions? These are all legal requirements that in a lot of cases have not been drilled into, because those legal requirements were written back when the cloud didn't exist or was just a gleam into somebody's eye. So we're trying to comply to compliance documentation that was written when the technology did not exist. So we have to start looking at that compliance as well to see if that applies. So all of these are factors that affect companies that have not yet made the jump. And startups are typically cloud native because they don't have that legacy. They don't have that information or that environment that they've built on over decades. They're brand new. They can go quickly to the cloud. Large organizations that have been around for a long time are a separate beast altogether. But governance is key to both of these. And moving to the cloud, as Dominic mentioned earlier, and as I mentioned at the beginning, lifting and shifting is only step one. Then you have to start looking at what other cloud services can I use to more efficiently run that environment with more performance and lower cost in order, because really a VM is not a cloud service. Hosting the VM is, but the VM itself is not a native cloud service. So we have to, everybody, all environments, enterprises have to look at all of these things to get comfortable enough to move on. And we've got lots of resources on Learn, which is Microsoft.com/learn, where you can actually run through some scenarios and sandboxes and technical documentation to help you gain that knowledge and that familiarity with the cloud so that you can more easily migrate.
Very good. Appreciate the depth and the transparency and on that answer. Very good insights you have just shared with us. One other theme that has emerged here has to do a little bit more about keeping up with changes in the capabilities and technology related to cloud is almost a full-time job. And curious if you could summarize for us, and if you look at the last 12 months or so, what may have happened in terms of development that people may not even be aware of in terms of capabilities. If you look back the last 12 months, what would be one or two things that you think are worth talking about?
One of the major things that has happened in cloud, especially in Azure, is the blurring of the lines in between Linux and Windows. Of course, Azure is the best place to run a Windows server. However, a large percentage of our capacity is now being run on open source. So things like that are typically Linux, for example, like Kubernetes and Docker containers and stuff that typically I've been historically on the Unix side, have now bled over and are running on Windows and can run Windows container. The same as our web services or .NET that typically has been almost uniquely a Windows world is now bled with .NET Core that you can deploy or build an application in .NET, but deploy not only on a Windows platform, but deploy it on a Linux platform with a Linux backend. So there's a blurring of those lines where it doesn't matter what you're deploying or what you're building and with language you're building it. The options for you to move it to the cloud into an environment that fits your needs have grown tremendously. VDI that I mentioned earlier, so virtual desktop infrastructure, has grown tremendously in terms of giving the opportunity and the capability of environments to dedicate specific resources to specific virtual desktop. For example, if you're somebody that's doing CAD work for blueprints and so on, and you need highly available GPUs for that display, you can actually assign GPUs to your VDI infrastructure. And the same with AI, where AI is now built into practically everything. I'll take an example of the Azure Security Center, where there's an AI behind it that looks at all of the logs from all of your machines and all of your services to detect things that are out of the ordinary. Like when I started my career 25, 30 years ago, we had to basically log on to every server or dump the logs from every workloads and then go through them either manually or with some kind of scripting engine to actually pull out things that we weren't expecting. And it took a long time. And the human brain is not built to go over thousands of lines of logs to find the one or two that are out of place. AI is specifically designed to look at stuff like that. So our Azure Security Center will look at all of your logs and pull out the one or two things that are out of the ordinary and raise the alert for you to say, Pierre is in Ottawa and he's logged in Ottawa, but somehow he's also logged in our South Africa data center. That's out of the ordinary. Has he been compromised? Has his credentials been hacked? Or It could be very well be that I've got a remote session to that place and a remote session to North America. It doesn't mean that it's bad, but it's something that needs to be investigated. The same with phishing attempts. Who got the email, who opened it, and so on. So those AI, and AI is now a building block of cloud service that really should be looked at by any enterprises that are looking at deploying a large workload in the cloud, because of the thoroughness of the analysis that can be done on the large amounts of data that all of these enterprises gather. So these are the few things that I've noticed in the last 6 to 12 months where there's been a great leap forward, in my opinion.
Fantastic, Pierre. Unfortunately, we're out of time now. We could certainly keep going the conversation here, and I encourage all of the participants look up at our LinkedIn for this conference. I have made a post. You can just look up my name and the post there. If you have a question, follow up on the question there. Feel free to do that. We'll try to connect back with the speakers. But you are very much thankful and grateful for your time and insights. Very interesting review of governance and what's available and how it should be done. So on behalf of our global community from Ottawa to the world, merci beaucoup, mon ami.
Merci. Thank you very much, and have a great day and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Pierre Roman, Senior Cloud Operations Leader at Microsoft. And he shared great insights about cloud governance with us, and sets us up for our last session of the day. And the last session of our day will come directly from Sweden. And we have the CEO and founder of Innovation 360, Magnus Spanker, talking to us directly about decision making in uncertain times and innovation acceleration at a global scale. Magnus is an author and expert in the area of innovation acceleration and working with global Fortune 500 companies on implementations of innovation acceleration systems. And he's going to bring all of that to his talk and to his live Q&A with us as well. So do not miss the session starting at the top of the hour. I'll be back with you and Magnus Spanker. Thank you.